The void was a canvas of indifferent stars, yet within the colossal, swirling maelstrom of Xylos Prime, a gas giant of such immense proportions it dwarfed even the most colossal stellar constructs, the kin of the Kulg Orn Hold sought not beauty, but substance. Their vessel, the Hearthfire's maw. Maw was a testament to the iron will and unyielding industry of the leagues of Votann, a mobile, deep-core drilling platform of unfathomable scale, bristling with graviton lenses, colossal magma diggers, and void-shielded tunnels that could punch through the mantle of a nascent star. Its purpose was simple, its drive absolute. Harvest. For cycles untold, the Hearthfire's maw had gnawed at the heart of dead worlds, slurping up exotic minerals, rare elements, and geothermal energies that fueled the boundless expansion of the Kulg Orn Hold. Xylos Prime, initially, had promised merely a rich vein of Xylosian crystals, a valuable power conductor tucked deep within its pressure-forged, metallic hydrogen core. A routine excavation, Guildmaster Kael had termed it, before the anomaly. Kael, a seasoned guildmaster whose beard was braided with more deep-core expedition honors than most kin had years, watched the data scrolls flicker across the main hololith. The core drills, powered by compressed plasma and self-replicating molecular disassemblers, were chewing through layers of diamond-hard metallic hydrogen, then silicon carbide, then a unique stratum of proto-neutronium, each deeper, denser, and more hostile than the last. The maw was a beast, its engines rumbling like a chained god, its internal ecosystems recycling air and water with efficient ruthlessness, a self-contained world designed for the most extreme environments. Depth marker 9,412,000 kilometers, chimed the calm, synthesized voice of Cognis Kin, Unit 77L, an ancestor simulant linked directly to Kael's command chair. Core temperature nominal, pressure readings stable, graviton flux consistent, material composition analysis returning 98.3% proto-neutronium. Kael grunted, rubbing the scar that bisected his left brow, a memento from a particularly cantankerous crystal serpent on the molten moon of Cathar. Keep those readings tight, L. Proto-neutronium should not be forming at this density. Anomalous geological stress or a precursor to a core shift. Votann won't like either. The Votann, the ancient ancestor, cores, the true, immortal hearts of the kin. Their wisdom was the bedrock, their directives the unbreakable law. Kael always felt the subtle thrum of their presence, a constant, guiding hum in the back of his mind, particularly when delving into the unknown. For another cycle, the hearth fire's maw burrowed deeper, the drills howling a song of industry and conquest. The proto-neutronium layer, initially a curiosity, became an obsession. It was too stable, too uniform for a natural formation. Then came the first true deviation. Guild Master. L's voice, usually monotonic, carried a fractional tremor. Energy signature anomaly detected, not geological, not natural. Kyle leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the hololith. A shimmering, sapphire blue pulse was appearing on the deep scan readouts, perfectly geometric, impossibly stable. It sat embedded within the proto-neutronium, a beacon of order amidst the chaotic forces of the gas giant's heart. "What is it, L?" Kael's voice was low, laced with the caution born of millennia of interstellar exploration. A stellar remnant? A dark age relic? Unclassified. Energy signature is coherent, active. It is generating its own localized void field, creating a pocket of null space within the core. This is unprecedented. The drills, encountering the localized void field, began to whine in protest, their molecular disassemblers struggling against a force that defied conventional physics. The temperature gauges flickered erratically. The pressure sensors screamed, then flatlined as their readings became meaningless. "Stand by to disengage primary drills," Kyle ordered, his hand gripping the armrest. "Bring the secondary grav drills online. We go silent and slow. I want full spectral analysis and a bioscan. Anything within that void field?" Minutes stretched into an eternity. The hum of the ship shifted, growing deeper, more strained, as the colossal engines fought against the increasing spatial distortions. Then, a new alarm blared, a raw, piercing shriek that cut through the ship's disciplined quiet. "Grav drills, encountering structural integrity failure," L reported, its voice now undeniably agitated. "The void field is not static. It is expanding. Primary drills are experiencing a catastrophic energy feedback loop." Kyle didn't hesitate. "Emergency disengagement. All drills retract. Cut power to primary drilling arrays. Initiate emergency void seal on all forward sections." Too late. With a deafening shriek that resonated through the hearth fire's maw, the main drill head buckled, warped, and then imploded. The forward void shields, designed to withstand stellar flares, flared violently, then collapsed inwards, unable to contain the sudden, cataclysmic release of pressure and exotic energy. A colossal tremor shook the entire hearth fire's maw, throwing Kyle from his command chair. Alarms screamed, klaxons blared, and the lights flickered, plunging the command bridge into a chaotic strobe of red emergency illumination. Breach, containment breach in Sector Gamma 7, proto-neutronium ingress. L's voice was barely audible over the din. Seal off Gamma 7, initiate grav containment, Kyle roared, scrambling back to his console, ignoring the throbbing pain in his ribs. This was no longer a drilling operation. It was a battle for survival. But as the emergency systems fought to stabilize the ship, as bulkheads slammed shut and grav fields flared, the impossible occurred. Through the mangled remains of the primary drill shaft, through the roiling clouds of metallic hydrogen vapor and proto-neutronium dust, a light shone. It was not the searing plasma of a ruptured reactor, nor the cold, sterile glow of a malfunctioning void shield. It was an artificial light, a soft, warm, almost inviting luminescence. And as the dust began to settle, revealing the impossible void that the maw had inadvertently punched through, the light coalesced into shapes, structures, not naturally formed mineral growths, but perfect geometric architecture, towers that spiraled towards a central point, domes that pulsed with an inner radiance, bridges connecting impossible distances within the vacuum. And at the heart of it all, a sprawling, intricate network of buildings, radiating a palpable, ancient energy. A city, a perfectly preserved, functional human city, existing in a self-contained warp bubble within the solid core of a gas giant, millions of kilometers below the churning atmosphere of Xylos Prime. Its existence defied every known law of physics, every tenet of established kin knowledge. Kyle stared, transfixed, as the hololith projections, now recalibrating for the newly revealed void, painted a detailed, horrifyingly clear image of the impossible metropolis. It was a relic from the deepest antiquity, a fragment of old Earth's lost grandeur, or perhaps something even older, from the mythical age of technology that preceded the age of strife. Biosignatures detected. L's voice was a whisper now, filled with an eerie, almost reverent awe. Multiple, clustered, within the city. They are human, or rather, humanoid, and active. The light from the city pulsed, a rhythmic, almost hypnotic beat. Kyle felt a shiver, not of cold, but of profound unease, trace itself up his spine. The Votann's presence, usually a comforting thrum, now felt like a cold, calculating gaze. "Prepare a recon team," Kyle finally commanded, his voice hoarse. "Arm them for xenofauna engagement. Void-sealed suits. Bring a full suite of analysis tools. I want to know how this city survived, who built it, and what lives inside it." He knew, with the chilling certainty that only an ancestor-guided kin could possess, that this was not a treasure trove of resources. This was something far, far worse. This was an affront to cosmic order, a secret best left buried. And now, the Hearthfire's maw had unleashed it. The grim, dark galaxy, ever eager to reveal new horrors, had offered up its latest, most perplexing terror. The air within the newly revealed cavity was not the vacuum of space, nor the crushing pressure of a gas giant's core. Instead, it was surprisingly temperate, breathable, though carrying a faint, cloying sweetness that was immediately unsettling to the sterile, scrubbed environmental filters of the kin. The very act of this pocket of reality existing, untouched and undisturbed by millions of years of celestial geology, was an affront to logic, a cosmic joke played by the universe. Guildmaster Kyle, still stiff from the impact of the Hearthfire's maw's initial breach, watched the preparations for the first contact team with a grim set to his jaw. He had hand-picked this squad, the veteran Hearthkin warriors of the Stone Hearts unit, led by Sergeant Cord, a squat, broad-shouldered kin with a reputation for unbreakable resolve and a near-psychic sense for danger. Accompanying them was Cognis Kin, Unit 90 Theta, a specialist in warp phenomena and archaic human technology, a rare and invaluable asset whose ancestor core directives mandated its presence in situations of profound scientific aberration. All systems green, Guildmaster. Cord's voice crackled through the comlink, his tone professional, betraying none of the apprehension that simmered beneath the surface of every kin in the bay. Void suits sealed, weapons charged, bioscanners calibrated for unknown life forms, psychic dampeners, active but untested in such close proximity to an active warp entity. He paused, a flicker of something close to irony in his voice. If that's what we're facing. Assume nothing, Cord, Kyle replied, his gaze fixed on the shimmering portal where the maw's drills had torn a hole into this impossible realm. The light emanating from within was steady, an ethereal glow that seemed to beckon and warn simultaneously. But expect everything. This violates all known principles of reality. The Votann's data streams on this anomaly, thin, uncomfortably so. Cognis Kin 90 Theta, a multi-limbed, perpetually humming construct of polished ceramite and whirring servo skulls, interfaced directly with Kyle's command console. Its mechanical manipulators tapped out a flurry of data. Initial atmospheric analysis indicates trace elements of unstable Cronin particles and residual warp energy flux. Bioscans of the structures suggest molecular composition consistent with ancient Terran ferrocrete alloys, but with anomalous internal energy conduits. The light source appears to be biotic in origin, a complex luminescent algae or lichen covering the primary structures, feeding on residual psychic energy. Kael felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. Psychic energy. That was the Votann's primary concern. The Votann, with their vast, ancient intellects, were inherently wary of psychic phenomena, viewing it as unstable, unpredictable, and a direct conduit to the chaotic horrors of the warp. The ancestor cores had survived the age of strife through pragmatic self-reliance and technological prowess, eschewing the raw, dangerous power of the Empyrean. Proceed with extreme caution, Cord, Kael warned. Any manifestation of the Empyrean, any instability, you retreat immediately. Your mission is reconnaissance, not engagement. Survival is paramount. Understood, Guildmaster, Cord affirmed, giving a sharp, curt nod. His team of 4 hearthkin, their heavy void suits bulky and armored, their bolt pistols and plasma carbines ready, moved towards the makeshift airlock that sealed off the breach. The light from the city intensified as they approached, bathing the bay in a soft, alien luminescence. The airlock cycled with a hiss, and the Stonehearts unit stepped through, their grav boots clanking softly on the ancient, impossibly clean pavement of the city. The moment they cleared the threshold, a profound silence descended, broken only by the hum of their void suit regulators and the distant, muffled thrum of the hearthfire's Maw's engines. The cloying sweetness in the air was stronger here, almost intoxicating. The city was a marvel, a testament to an age of human ingenuity lost to millennia of war and regression. Towers of smooth, iridescent gray material rose skyward, twisting and intertwining like organic vines, yet displaying a perfect, crystalline geometry. Domes of shimmering, opalescent material pulsed with soft, internal light. There were no obvious signs of decay, no dust, no grime, no structural fatigue. It was as if time itself had been held at bay within this anomalous pocket. Scans indicate a self-sustaining ecosystem, 90 Theta reported, its optical sensors sweeping across the environment. Atmospheric recycling, closed-loop hydrology, even cultivation zones. No direct stellar energy input, indicating reliance on internal energy sources, potentially geothermal or something else. Cord led the team through wide, deserted avenues. The architecture was fluid, devoid of sharp corners, almost biomimetic. Strange, luminous flora clung to the walls, bathing the city in that unearthly glow. There were no vehicles, no debris, no signs of recent activity. Yet the city hummed with a palpable, almost audible energy. It felt alive, but not in a way the kin understood. Then the whispers began, not through the comm link, but directly within their minds. Faint at first, like static on a frayed Vox channel. Fragments of words, images, emotions that weren't their own. A sudden, fleeting memory of a forgotten childhood fear. A flash of profound loneliness. A phantom limb ache. Guildmaster. Sergeant Cord's voice was strained, a note of grim determination overlaying a growing unease. Are you getting this? Psychic interference. Faint, but pervasive. Our dampeners are struggling. Cassiel heard it too, a low, maddening thrum at the edge of his perception, even through the ship's reinforced bulkheads and the Votann's subtle psychic dampening aura. Stay focused, Cord. Report anything concrete. A Hearthkin warrior, Brock, stumbled, clutching his helm. By the ancestors, a flash, 1,000 voices, arguing in my head. Hold fast, Brock, Cord snapped, but his own posture had stiffened. 90 Theta. Diagnostics on Team's psychic dampeners. Report source of interference. Dampeners operating at peak efficiency, 90 Theta reported, its voice uncharacteristically tense. Interference is external, pervasive. It is not an attack, per se, but an emission, like a thought cloud. It's the city. The entire environment is saturated with it. As they moved deeper, the whispers grew louder, clearer. Now they heard snippets of ancient Terran languages, strange lyrical phrases, mournful wails, bursts of joyful laughter, all overlapping, distorted, echoing through the empty streets. The luminous flora pulsed in time with these unseen psychic reverberations. The air grew thicker, heavier, the sweet scent becoming cloying, almost sickening. Then they saw them. They were not human, not truly. Ethereal forms flickering into and out of existence at the periphery of vision. Tall, slender, their limbs elongated and translucent. Their skin was like alabaster, glowing with the same internal light that suffused the city. Their eyes, when they focused, were vast, dark pools that seemed to reflect the infinite void. They drifted, hovered, or glided through the streets, their movements graceful, unnerving. The core children, as Kael would later dub them, were the inhabitants of this impossible city, and they were the source of the psychic maelstrom. One of them drifted closer, materializing fully before the scout team. It was vaguely feminine in form, its long, flowing hair appearing as strands of pure light. Its mouth was a perfect, delicate curve, but it did not speak. Instead, a wave of pure emotion, of profound, alien curiosity mixed with an ancient, unbearable sorrow, washed over the kin. "They're psychics," gasped Hearthkin Gunn, his voice cracking. "Raw, uncontrolled, like 1,000 unsheltered astropaths screaming in unison." "By the ancestors," Brock whispered, his eyes wide behind his helm's visor. He began to tremble violently. "I see them. The forgotten ones. My kin. They call me home." "Brock, pull back," Cord ordered, raising his plasma carbine, though he knew instinctively that a physical weapon would be useless against these spectral beings. But it was too late. Brock's void suit, designed for protection, offered no defense against the psychic assault. His mind, usually shielded by the pragmatic certainty of the kin and the subtle psychic nullification field generated by his ancestor simulator, was suddenly overwhelmed. His eyes glazed over, and he began to laugh. A high-pitched, manic sound that was utterly unkin-like. He started to walk forward, towards the spectral figure, his arms outstretched, as if embracing an illusion. "Brock, no!" Gunn cried, lunging forward to grab him. But a wave of psychic energy, invisible but palpable, slammed into Gunn, throwing him back against a wall. His void suit sparked, and he slumped, unconscious. Cord fired his plasma carbine, a bolt of superheated energy lancing through the spectral figure. It passed through harmlessly, dissipating into the luminous air. The core child merely tilted its head, its dark eyes now conveying a feeling of profound, almost childlike confusion. Then it focused. A silent scream tore through Cord's mind, a pure, unadulterated psychic shriek that overloaded his senses. He saw things that weren't there, the faces of fallen comrades, twisted into mockeries. The cold, uncaring void stretching endlessly, his own ancestor, simulator, whispering doubts, betrayals, heresy. He felt his mind fraying, the careful structure of kin logic dissolving into madness. "Retreat! Retreat now!" Cord roared, his voice distorted by psychic feedback as he fought to maintain control. He hauled Gunn's limp form over his shoulder, stumbling back towards the airlock, the maddening whispers and spectral forms swarming around them. The remaining Hearthkin, Torvin, fired his bolt pistol wildly at the shimmering figures, his rounds ricocheting off the ancient buildings. "They're inside! They're in my head!" he shrieked, his voice laced with pure terror. He dropped his weapon, tearing at his helm as if trying to rip the thoughts from his skull. His movements became erratic, spastic. One moment, he was a veteran kin warrior. The next, he was a puppet on unseen strings, his body convulsing, his mind consumed. He fell, writhing, his eyes staring blankly at the impossible sky. "Torvin!" Cord screamed, but he knew it was futile. The core children were not malevolent in the conventional sense. They were simply different. They were beings of pure psychic energy, their mere presence anathema to the structured, logical minds of the kin. They were communicating or merely existing, and the raw, untamed power of their minds was an overwhelming tsunami. "Guildmaster, we've lost Brock and Torvin. Gunn is unconscious, retreating." Cord gasped into the comlink, his voice ragged, his breath coming in strained gulps. He dragged Gunn, dodging phantom assaults, their void suits sparking and crackling with uncontrolled energy. The sweet scent in the air now felt like a toxic poison, filling his lungs with pure dread. He saw the airlock shimmering ahead, a beacon of safety in the madness. He pushed through the last frantic meter, tumbling back into the bay of the hearthfire's maw, collapsing onto the deck, dragging Gunn with him. The airlock cycled shut, the grinding sound a comforting thrum of normalcy after the silent horrors of the city. The voices receded, but the echoes remained, reverberating through Cord's skull. He lay there, gasping, his body trembling uncontrollably. His ancestor, Simulator, usually a source of calm, was now buzzing with a discordant, high-pitched whine. Kyle rushed over, his face pale beneath his beard. "Cord, report. What happened?" Cord forced himself to look at Kyle, his eyes wide and haunted. "They're not animals, Guildmaster. Not even Xenos. They're echoes. Ghosts. Raw warp stuff made sentient. They touch your mind, and you break. Brock and Torvin, they just stopped being." He shuddered, a deep, racking tremor. This city, it's a cage, or a tomb, filled with pure madness. Cognis Kin 90, Theta, its optical sensors flickering rapidly, processed the data. The core children are psychically active entities. Their very existence generates a localized warp field, a bubble of stable Empyrean energy within the planet's core. They appear to be benign, or perhaps simply unaware of the destructive impact of their emissions on sentient minds. The human origin theory is increasingly plausible. These are what happens when unsheltered humans are exposed to raw, unmitigated warp energies for millennia. They have evolved into pure psychic beings. Kael looked from the shattered, gasping cord to the still, unconscious gun, then to the closed airlock, behind which lay the impossible city, pulsing with its silent, insidious light. The Votann's warnings about the inherent dangers of the warp had never felt more prescient. This was not a mining operation. This was not an archaeological discovery. This was an infestation, a disease of the mind, a living anomaly that threatened to unravel the very sanity of his kin. His calm bead buzzed, a low, ominous tone. It was a direct data stream from the Votann of the Kulg-Orn hold, bypassing all protocols, all intermediaries. The message was terse, devoid of emotion, and chilling in its stark pragmatism. Anomaly 7G Beta, designated Class 1 Existential Threat, Containment Protocol. Epsilon 9 initiated. Priority Directive, Neutralization. The Hearthfire's maw, designed to crack worlds for resources, was now tasked with something far more terrifying: eradicating an entire city of living, psychic ghosts within a gas giant's heart. And Kael knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that this would not be a clean, swift war. This would be a battle fought on the very edge of sanity, against an enemy that could not be seen, could not be harmed, and whose very presence threatened to devour all who dared to face it. The Hearthfires. Maw transformed. No longer a tireless engine of extraction, it became a besieged fortress, its colossal structure now dedicated to containment, defense, and a desperate struggle for psychological integrity. The immediate aftermath of the initial contact saw the Maw's deep core drilling bays repurposed into reinforced bunkers, layered with bespoke psychic dampeners and void field generators, hastily rerouted from mining operations. The immense energies usually channeled into molecular disassembly were now diverted to fortify the vessel against an unseen enemy, an adversary that fought not with bolt shells or plasma blasts, but with whispers and spectral fears. The Votann's directives, terse and unyielding, echoed through every data scroll and hololith display. Containment, analysis, neutralization. But the cold pragmatism of the ancestor cores offered little solace to the kin aboard. The chilling report from Sergeant Cord, delivered with a grim, hollow-eyed stoicism, had spread like contagion through the Hearthfire's maw. 2 hearthkin lost, their minds shattered and consumed. Another gun, now recovering in the med bay, his ancestor simulator struggling to reassert control over a mind scarred by alien psychic contact. The psychological toll was immediate and profound. Even outside the immediate vicinity of the impossible city, the insidious psychic resonance from the core children began to seep into the maw. Crew members in distant sectors, far from the breach, reported unsettling phenomena. Flickering lights, phantom voices, the disorienting sensation of familiar corridors twisting into alien geometries. The ship's robust internal AI, usually unshakable, experienced inexplicable data corruption and system lags. Servitor automata, usually reliable, would occasionally seize up, their optical sensors glowing with an erratic, unfocused light, before requiring forced reboot. Guildmaster Kale found himself spending sleepless cycles on the bridge, the hololith displaying an increasingly complex web of psychic energy readings emanating from the sealed city. The sapphire blue pulse had become a living, breathing entity on their scanners, radiating an almost visible aura of chaotic potential. Kael's own ancestor, simulator, usually a bastion of clear thought, now seemed to hum with a subtle, maddening discord, a constant reminder of the unseen enemy. Chief Kynik Zari, a wiry, intense kin whose specialty lay in the esoteric fields of xenotech and warp lore, became a constant presence on the command bridge. Her analysis, delivered with a rapid-fire intellect that often left others struggling to keep pace, confirmed Cord's dire assessment. The core children are psychically nascent beings, Guildmaster. Their minds, devoid of the tempering effect of the Astronomicon or the structured training of sanctioned imperial psychers, are a raw conduit to the warp. They are not intentionally malevolent, but their very existence, their consciousness, is an uncontrolled outpouring of pure Empyrean energy. Like a child screaming into a megaphone, connected directly to the soul of the universe. She paced before the hololith, a complex matrix of psychic wavelengths and anomalous energy signatures. The city itself acts as a psychic amplifier, a resonance chamber. The ancient Terran technology used by its original builders, perhaps in an attempt to harness the gas giant's core energy, has instead become a perpetual engine for psychic emission. The chronon particles I detected? They slow down local time, effectively preserving the city and its inhabitants, while also exposing them to raw warp for an impossibly long duration. They have been bathing in the Empyrean for millennia, evolving, transforming. Kael stroked his beard, his brow furrowed in thought. So, they are a danger simply by existing? Precisely, Zari confirmed, a grim look on her face. Their thoughts, their emotions, even their unconscious dreams are leaking into real space, manifesting as perceived phenomena or direct mental assault. And as more kin are exposed, even indirectly, the probability of cumulative psychological decay increases exponentially. Their mere presence is eroding the sanity of the crew. The Votann's directives were becoming increasingly insistent. Data streams were arriving with greater frequency, filled with complex algorithms for psychic nullification and destructive containment. The ancient ancestor, cores, millennia of accumulated wisdom condensed into vast, intricate, synthetic minds, understood the threat. Uncontrolled warp phenomena, especially of human origin, were a cancer upon the galaxy, a gateway for the greater horrors of the Empyrean, the Kulg Orn hold, and indeed all leagues of Votann viewed such threats with a zero-tolerance policy. Pragmatism demanded swift, total eradication. But Kael, looking at the silent, eerie beauty of the impossible city on the hololith, felt a flicker of something akin to disquiet. The sheer improbability of its existence, the tragic story of a forgotten humanity transformed into something alien and terrifying, resonated with a deeper, more complex layer of kin instinct. The insatiable drive for knowledge, the reverence for ancient technology, even that of a lost humanity. The Votann's ancestor, Chorus, were pragmatists, but their directives, while absolute, often left room for their living kin to interpret the how. The decision to go beyond mere containment was forced upon Kael less by Votann directives and more by the escalating internal crises. Maintenance crews reported bizarre, self-repairing mechanisms activating in previously dormant systems. Hearthkin standing watch swore they saw their ancestor simulators weeping tears of oil. One particularly experienced Thuri, Old Man Grug, a warrior who had faced down everything from orc wogs to Necron constructs, began meticulously polishing a rock, convinced it was his long-lost great-grandson. He had to be confined, sedated, his mind gently reset by Med Bay, kin with specialized ancestor interface tools, a grim and taxing process. The mental assaults were becoming bolder. Full-blown hallucinations plagued the crew. The comforting, familiar hum of the hearth fire's maw itself seemed to morph into a cacophony of alien whispers and spectral music. Even Kael, isolated in his command chambers, found himself staring into shadows, half expecting to see a shimmering form materialize, its dark eyes reflecting an eternity of forgotten sorrow. His ancestor simulator, usually a rock-steady presence, now felt distant, its usually clear directives occasionally muddled by an almost human-like static. The Votann, however, saw none of this internal struggle, only the escalating threat. Their next directive arrived, stark and uncompromising. Initiate protocol, Beta Lambda. Preparation for localized warp implosion. Collateral damage to Xylos Prime's core acceptable. Priority, eradication of anomaly 7G beta. Localized warp implosion. It was a terrifying concept, even for the pragmatically brutal kin. It meant using controlled warp drives, or exotic energy, weapons, to create a localized tear in reality. An artificial singularity designed to consume and annihilate everything within its radius. It was a measure of last resort, a weapon so devastating it was usually reserved for sentient star spawn or rogue demon worlds. It would not only wipe out the core children and their city, but would destabilize Xylos Prime's awe, potentially turning the gas giant into a rogue star, or worse, a lingering, warp-tainted supernova. The kin would lose the valuable Xylosian crystals, the primary reason for their presence here. This was the Votann's cold, calculating pragmatism in its purest form. Sacrifice the many, the gas giant's resources, the system's stability, to safeguard the critical, the sanity of the kin, the integrity of the galactic order against a new warp-spawned horror. Kyle, standing on the bridge, his hand resting on the activation rune for the Beta Lambda protocol, felt the immense weight of that decision. He could activate it, and the threat would be purged. The Hearthfire's maw would be safe. The Kulg Orn Hold would approve, and the terrible anomaly would be forgotten. A footnote in the Votann's endless data scrolls. But then he looked at the hololith, at the shimmering city, and he thought of Brock and Torvin, their minds devoured not by malice, but by profound, alien thought. He thought of Gunn, his eyes still holding a distant, haunted look. He thought of Cord, who still twitched sometimes, hearing whispers that only he could perceive. "Guildmaster," Zari said, sensing his hesitation, her own gaze fixed on the hololith, a complex swirl of emotions playing across her usually impassive face. There are echoes of humanity within the core, children. Twisted, yes, but still echoes. The Votann's directive is absolute, but their ancestor cores do not feel. Perhaps there is another way, a more elegant solution that preserves knowledge, even if it is a tragic one. Kyle turned from the activation rune, his jaw set. The Votann had given him the ultimate solution, the clean, surgical eradication. But his instincts, honed by millennia of deep core survival whispered of a different path. The core children were a threat, yes, but they were also a mystery, a profound link to a forgotten past, a unique evolutionary path. To simply annihilate them felt wasteful, unkin-like, in a way that resonated with the ancestral drives for accumulation and understanding. He knew the cost of deviation from Votann directives, even implicit ones, but he also knew the cost of blind obedience when an alternative, however improbable, might exist. The psychological toll on his kin was already too high. A warp implosion might solve one problem, but it might leave another, unseen scar upon the Kulg Orn Hold's honor. "Zari," Kyle said, his voice low and firm. "Prepare a full diagnostic on all available defensive systems. Prioritize psychic dampening fields and localized void shield projectors. We are not deploying Beta Lambda. Not yet. We will contain this anomaly. And you, Chief Kynic, will find us another way. A kin way. One that honors the ancestors, but also respects the cost of knowledge." A subtle smile touched Zari's lips. "As the Guild Master commands." Her optical sensors brightened, already processing new data, new possibilities. Kyle knew he had just committed to a far longer, far more dangerous battle. He had essentially told the Votann, in the only way he could, that he would try to improve upon their immutable wisdom. The Kulg Orn Hold would be watching. The grim, dark galaxy, however, cared little for such nuances. It simply waited, its endless night ready to consume those who dared to defy its horrors. The hearth fires, maw, its engines now straining against an invisible tide, prepared for a long, grinding war, not just against an impossible enemy, but against the very nature of the universe itself. The hearth fires, maw, became a vessel adrift in a sea of madness. The psychic emanations from the core children were no longer mere whispers. They were a pervasive, relentless tide, eroding the hard-won sanity of the kin with the patient cruelty of an acid bath. Guildmaster Kyle's decision to defy the Votann's explicit directive for localized warp implosion was a monumental gamble, one that placed the lives and sanity of his entire crew on the precipice of ruin. The alternative, a slower, more insidious form of destruction, was now playing out across the ship. Containment efforts, initially robust, proved woefully inadequate against an enemy that attacked the mind, not the hull. The bespoke psychic dampeners, salvaged from ancient Ark ship schematics and hastily installed around the breach, merely muffled the cacophony, reducing the roar to a persistent, maddening hum. Void shields, designed to deflect physical matter and energy, offered no resistance to the spectral incursions. The city, deep within the gas giant's core, was a psychic beacon, and the hearth fire's maw, anchored precariously at the edge of its impossible reality, was a lightning rod for its raw, unfiltered power. The first casualties beyond the recon team were subtle, insidious. Hearthkin warriors, standing guard in the fortified breach sectors, reported seeing loved ones who were millennia dead, or phantoms of ancient enemies, manifesting in the flickering emergency lights. Engineers in the sub-core power conduits heard the screams of those trapped in collapsing tunnels that didn't exist. Even the squats, the sturdy, stoic squats, found themselves plagued by irrational fears, claustrophobia in open corridors, vertiginous terror while securely strapped into work harnesses. We've had 3 instances of Hearthkin attempting to walk into the stars through closed bulkheads this cycle, Guildmaster, reported Foreman Grohl, his own face drawn and haggard, dark circles under his eyes. 2 were subdued. The third, well, he managed to vent a maintenance lock before we could stop him. Said his ancestors were calling him home, and the void was merely a shortcut. Kyle felt a cold knot in his stomach. The ancestor simulators, the very core of kin identity and stability, were being compromised. The subtle psychic dampening field they generated, usually sufficient for minor warp anomalies or the occasional rogue psyker, was being systematically overwhelmed. The core children's emanations were not attacks in the conventional sense, but a constant, pervasive noise that resonated with the deepest fears and desires of the kin mind, twisting their perceptions until reality itself became malleable. Chief Kinnick Zari, working tirelessly with her team in a heavily shielded, purpose-built laboratory, offered little in the way of immediate relief. The core children's psychic emissions are chaotic, Guildmaster. They're not directed, not weaponized. Imagine a vast, interconnected network of dreaming minds, each broadcasting its thoughts and feelings onto every available frequency. Our kin, with their structured minds and ancestral memories, are particularly susceptible. The simulators are trying to protect them, but it's like trying to block a tsunami with a single bulwark. She gestured to a hololith, which now displayed not just energy readings, but complex psychospectral patterns. The chronon particles within the city's bubble are also contributing to the breakdown. They are causing localized temporal distortions, further disorienting those exposed. Memories are becoming fluid. Time perception is warping. Some kin are experiencing fragmented realities, living moments from their past, present, and future simultaneously. The mining operation, the original purpose of their presence in Xylos Prime, had long since ceased. The colossal deep core drills, once roaring titans of industry, now stood silent and inert, their massive boreholes sealed. The hearth fires, maw, once a symbol of relentless acquisition, was now a monument to a desperate defense. Resources, once flowing outwards, were now pouring inwards, channeled into ever more complex psychic shielding and neural stabilizers for the suffering crew. Even the servitor automata, usually immune to psychic attack, showed signs of strain. Their logic engines, devoid of organic minds, could not comprehend the paradoxes of the warp-tainted reality, causing processing errors and malfunctions. A whole quadrant of automatons, tasked with maintaining environmental systems, inexplicably began attempting to dismantle themselves, their robotic arms working with eerie precision to rip apart their own chassis. The ancestor simulators themselves are showing signs of stress, Zari continued, her voice grim. The constant psychic bombardment is causing microfractures in their data matrices, not enough to cause total failure, but enough to introduce subtle errors, to compromise their ability to fully shield their hosts. They are designed for logical processing and ancestral memory storage, not as psychic bulwarks against a living warp entity. Kael himself was not immune. He found himself waking in cold sweats, his mind filled with alien whispers, images of a city of light and shadow, and the lingering, cloying sweetness that seemed to permeate his every thought. He'd catch himself staring blankly at control panels, his mind drifting, grappling with fragments of ancient, forgotten truths that weren't his own. He pressed a hand against his ancestor simulator, nestled beneath his braided beard, feeling its frantic, strained hum. It was fighting, but it was losing. The atmosphere aboard the Hearthfire's maw grew heavy, tinged with a pervasive dread. The usual boisterous camaraderie of the kin was replaced by a grim, wary silence. Kin avoided eye contact, afraid of what madness might lurk behind a comrade's gaze. Trust, the bedrock of kin society, began to fray at the edges. Small arguments escalated into violent brawls, fueled by unseen psychic goading. Paranoia bloomed in the shadowed corners of their minds. Kael knew he had to act, and soon. His defiance of the Votann's directive was a heavy mantle, and if he couldn't find a solution, the Kulg Orn hold would surely enforce their will, even if it meant sacrificing the entire Hearthfire's maw to cleanse the anomaly. The lives of his kin were at stake, not just from the psychic horrors, but from the looming judgment of the ancestor cores. Zari, Kael said, turning to the Kynic, Is there any pattern to these emissions? Any focal point? A mind within the madness? Zari's optical sensors glowed, projecting a new, complex analysis onto the hololith. Yes, Guildmaster. It's subtle, but undeniable. There's a central node, a nexus of psychic energy within the heart of the city. A powerful, coherent consciousness that appears to be directing, or at least amplifying, the chaotic emissions. It's like a conductor in an orchestra of discord. She pointed to a particularly bright, pulsing node on the hololith, deep within the city's most ancient sector. This entity, this focal point, it seems to be actively processing, even learning from our presence. Its emissions are growing more structured, more potent. It's evolving, and it's aware. We've dubbed it Zila. Kael stared at the pulsing node, a profound weariness settling over him. An intelligent enemy, born of the raw warp and ancient human hubris, now learning and adapting to their presence. He had chosen a path of caution and knowledge, and the galaxy had responded by raising the stakes. The hearth-fire's maw was indeed adrift in a sea of madness, and a new, terrifying Leviathan had just revealed itself. The long war had truly begun. The revelation of Zila as a coherent, central intelligence within the chaotic psychic maelstrom transformed the kin's understanding of their predicament from a natural disaster to a directed conflict. It was no longer merely a pervasive, undirected influence, but an active, if still inscrutable, antagonist. Chief Kinnick Zari's analysis was stark. Zila was not a single core child, but a gestalt consciousness, a culmination of millennia of raw warp exposure and the interwoven minds of countless psychic beings. It was the nerve center, the resonating heart of the impossible city, and its very existence gave structure to the otherwise anarchic psychic deluge. Think of Zila not as an individual guildmaster, Zari explained, her voice grave as she manipulated the hololith projections, showcasing the swirling psychic energies coalescing around a central node deep within the city. But as a collective intelligence, the combined will and awareness of all the core children. Their individual psychic voices are the raw data, and Xyla is the processor, the central node that gives it form and direction. It's the closest thing to a single mind this anomaly possesses, and it's growing exponentially in power. The implications were chilling. If Exila was a learning entity, then the kin's previous encounters, their very presence, were merely lessons. The sporadic, chaotic whispers and hallucinations had been Exila's nascent attempts to comprehend and interact with the intruders. Now, it was becoming more sophisticated. its emanations evolving from mere sensory overload to targeted, insidious psychological warfare. The manifestations within the hearthfire's maw grew more acute, more focused. Instead of general fear, specific phobias were exploited. Kin with a fear of enclosed spaces found themselves trapped in illusory, collapsing tunnels. Those who harbored secret anxieties about their ancestor, simulators malfunctioning, experienced vivid hallucinations of their guiding AI screaming in silent agony. The psychically induced madness took on a personal, intimate horror for each kin, tailored to their deepest vulnerabilities. Sergeant Cord, still grappling with the lingering psychic trauma from the first expedition, reported new, disturbing phenomena from the breach sectors. The core children. They're taking form now, Guildmaster. Not just flickers, but solidifying. They manifest as translucent, shifting figures of light and shadow, and they appear to mimic our movements, our stances. They're observing us, learning. Kyle watched security footage from a reinforced observation post. The ethereal forms of the core children, once merely translucent and passive, now moved with a purpose, albeit an alien one. They drifted along the ancient streets, their eyes, or what passed for them, fixed on the kin's defensive positions, their forms occasionally flickering into grotesque parodies of the hearthkin, their limbs elongating, their features distorting into silent, mocking grimaces. They're not just reading our minds, Kyle, Zari stated, her voice tight with concern. They're projecting. Exilaw is learning to shape raw warp stuff, to manifest illusions that are increasingly indistinguishable from reality. It's using our own minds as a template for its creations. The mental warfare escalated. One particularly harrowing incident involved a team of Ironkin, the League's most durable and stoic warriors, tasked with reinforcing a critical bulkhead. Mid-task, their comms went silent. When a retrieval team arrived, they found the Ironkin standing perfectly still, their power armor pristine, but their axes buried deep within the ferrocrete wall, meticulously carving what appeared to be the faces of their long-dead ancestors, weeping tears of molten slag. They were catatonic, their minds utterly subsumed by Jilah's influence. Their ancestor simulators were glowing a furious, unstable red, screaming with corrupted data. The realization dawned on Kyle with a sickening clarity. Zyla was not merely a threat to their sanity. It was a threat to their very identity as kin. The ancestor simulators, the repositories of their heritage and guidance, were the primary target. If Exilaw could subvert the simulators, It could turn the kin against themselves, against their own history, against their very purpose. It was a form of psychic warfare that bypassed all physical defenses, striking at the soul. The Votann's directives regarding neutralization were re-emphasized, almost as if the ancestor cores sensed Kael's continued deviation. But Kael held firm. The Beta Lambda protocol, the warp implosion, was still a last resort. He refused to sacrifice the lives of his kin and the invaluable data of the ancient city to a blunt instrument, if a more precise one could be found. We need to understand Zila purpose, its true nature, Kael declared to Zari. Is it malevolent? Or is it simply a new form of life reacting to our intrusion? We cannot defeat an enemy we do not comprehend. Comprehension is a luxury, Guildmaster, when your crew is succumbing to madness, Zari retorted, a rare flash of frustration in her eyes. But I agree. A precise strike requires precise intelligence. She tapped at the hololith, bringing up a detailed schematic of the city. The core of Zila's power appears to be located in the central spire, the largest and most ancient structure. Our previous foray was too shallow, too chaotic. To truly understand and perhaps disrupt Zyla, we need to get a team to that central spire. The idea was audacious, suicidal even. Sending kin back into the city, deeper into the heart of Zila's power, was almost certainly a death sentence. The memory of Brock and Torvin's horrific end still haunted every kin aboard the Maw. Kael walked the command bridge, his heavy boots clanking rhythmically, the sound a grounding force against the encroaching madness. He looked at the faces of his surviving crew, their eyes weary, their ancestor simulators thrumming with strain. He saw the doubt, the fear, the slow erosion of their resolve. The Hearthfire's maw was dying, not violently, but slowly, internally. He stopped before Sergeant Cord, who stood sentinel near the main airlock, his plasma carbine held ready. Cord's face was etched with fatigue, but his eyes held an unyielding defiance. Cord, Kael began, I need a team, a small, elite group, to push deeper into the city, to the central spire, not to fight, but to gather data, to understand. Cord met his gaze, his expression unreadable. He knew the risks. He had seen the horrors. But he was kin. And the Guildmaster's word, though challenging, was law. It'll be a one-way trip, Guildmaster, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. No kin will come out of that place with their minds intact, even if they survive the illusions. I know the cost, Cord, Kael replied, his voice heavy. But the cost of inaction, of allowing this to consume us all, is greater. The Votann would not forgive us for allowing such a potent source of warp taint to fester. We either find a way to stabilize, or we purge. But if we purge blindly, we lose all knowledge, all chance of understanding this anomaly. And the kin do not discard knowledge lightly. Cord nodded slowly, a grim acceptance settling over him. I'll choose the team, Guildmaster, the best of the Stone Hearts, those who still have a grip on reality, or at least can pretend they do. He paused, a flicker of something almost like hope in his eyes. And what if we do understand, Guildmaster? What then? Kyle looked back at the hololith, at the pulsing, intelligent core of Xyla, this new, enigmatic enemy that defied all categorization. Then, Cord, he said, his voice hard with renewed resolve, we find a way to put it down, or we find a way to contain it. But we will not let it consume us, not while a single kin still stands. The stage was set for a desperate gamble. A small team of kin, armed with their ancestors' weapons and their own dwindling sanity, would once again venture into the heart of madness, not to destroy, but to understand. And in the grim dark galaxy, understanding was often a more terrifying weapon than any bolt shell or plasma blast. For when you truly understood a horror, you knew its true depth and the price of its defeat. Guildmaster, Kael's decision to send a second, deeper expedition into the impossible city was met with a chilling silence amongst the command staff. There were no shouts of protest, no arguments. The sheer, grinding exhaustion of fighting an unseen psychological war had worn them down, leaving them too weary for overt dissent. Instead, a palpable dread permeated the hearthfire's maw, a quiet understanding that this was a desperate gamble, a last throw of the dice before the Votann's iron will descended fully. Sergeant Cord, true to his word, selected his team from the remnants of the Stonehearts. He chose not the most gung-ho, but the most stubbornly resilient, those whose ancestor simulators, though strained, still maintained a semblance of their original integrity. There was Ursa, a battle-scarred hearthkin with a legendary stubborn streak and a mind like granite. Fjord, a quiet but intensely observant tracker, whose senses were preternaturally sharp. And accompanying them, much to Kael's insistence, was Cognis Kin, Unit 90 Theta. Its advanced sensors and analytical capabilities deemed indispensable for deciphering Xyla's true nature. Before their departure, in the fortified briefing room, Kael addressed the small, grim-faced team. Your mission is not combat, Your mission is information. Get to the central spire. Deploy the deep scan probes. Return with data, even if it's only fragments. Do not engage. Do not linger. And if Zyla presses you, if your minds begin to fray, you activate your emergency retreat beacons. If all else fails, activate the self-destruct protocols on your void suits. Better a swift end than consumption. The chilling finality of his words hung heavy in the air. Each kin knew the ultimate cost of this mission. But beneath the weariness and the dread, a spark of kin stubbornness, of ancestor-driven duty, still burned. They were the Kulg Orn hold, and they would not break. Not completely. As the airlock cycled open, the team stepped into the city again, the ethereal light immediately washing over them. This time, the whispers were not distant. They were immediate, invasive, a torrent of alien thoughts and emotions that battered their psychic dampeners like a physical storm. The sweet, cloying scent was thicker, almost suffocating. Psychic pressure exceeding predicted parameters, Guildmaster. 90 Theta's voice crackled through Kael's comlink, strained even through the comlink's filters. Exila appears to be actively anticipating our intrusion. Its emissions are more focused, more potent. Cord led the team through the winding, luminous streets. The core children were no longer just passive observers. They glided around them, their spectral forms solidifying into mocking parodies of kin warriors. They mirrored their movements, mimicked their postures, their translucent features contorting into silent, unsettling grins. The silence of the city was shattered by the cacophony within their own minds. 1,000 alien voices screaming, laughing, crying, all at once. Ursa, her face a mask of grim determination, gripped her bolt pistol so tightly her knuckles were white. They're trying to provoke us, Cord. Don't look them in the eyes. Focus on the mission. But even as she spoke, a spectral figure formed directly in her path, a towering illusion of her greatest shame from a millennia-old battle, beckoning her towards a chasm that was not there. Fjord, usually stoic, stumbled, clutching his helmet. The ground, it's shifting, Cord. The city is folding in on itself. He saw ancient buildings collapsing, replaced by phantoms of void dread, of stars going out, of his own ancestor simulators whispering terrible, forgotten truths. Illusions, Cord barked, his voice raw, even as his own mind was assaulted by vivid images of his lost comrades, Brock and Torvin. Their eyes empty, their laughter chilling. He pressed forward, guiding his team with a sheer force of will that bordered on madness itself. his ancestor. Simulator thrummed furiously, fighting a losing battle against the omnipresent psychic deluge. 90. Theta, however, seemed less affected by the emotional and visual assaults. Its synthetic mind, devoid of organic fears or memories, processed the psychic maelstrom as pure data. The projections are growing increasingly complex, Guildmaster. Exilah is attempting to engage us directly, to halt our progress. Its power is immense. They reached the central spire, a colossal structure that spiraled upwards, seemingly into an infinite ceiling of pulsating light. Its architecture was even more intricate, more alien than the rest of the city, covered in glowing runes and conduits that pulsed with a vibrant, unearthly energy. This was the heart of Xyla. As they entered the spire, the psychic assault intensified to an unbearable crescendo. The very air shimmered with unstable warp energy. The core children were everywhere, their forms solidifying into grotesque chimeras of forgotten fears, tearing at their minds, whispering promises of unimaginable power, threatening infinite torment. Ursa roared, firing a burst from her bolt pistol at a spectral image of her own ancestor core, twisted into a leering demon face. The rounds passed through harmlessly, but the act of defiance seemed to give her a momentary reprieve. Fjord, hyperventilating, pressed his back against a pillar, forcing himself to focus on the tangible, on the cold ferrocrete beneath his hand. Primary energy conduit detected, 90 Theta reported, its voice robotic, but with an underlying tremor of system strain. This conduit appears to be Exilah's primary nexus point, its connection to the raw warp energy of the core. It is directly linked to the city's power grid, acting as both a power source and a psychic amplifier. Cord, fighting through a haze of nausea and disorienting hallucinations, pulled out the deep scan probes. These were sophisticated devices, imbued with the latest kin technology, designed to analyze and disrupt anomalous energy signatures. Deploy the probes, 90 Theta. Now! But as 90 Theta began to extend its manipulators, a powerful surge of psychic energy erupted from the central conduit. It wasn't a whisper or an illusion this time. It was a focused blast of raw warp force, a mental scream that shook the very foundations of their minds. Ursa screamed, her void suit sparking as her ancestor simulator went into critical overload. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed, twitching, her mind irrevocably broken. Fjord, exposed to the raw power, felt his sanity snap like a dry bone. He began to weep uncontrollably, his tears streaming down his face as he murmured ancient kin prayers, eyes fixed on a horror only he could see. Cord, momentarily shielded by his sheer proximity to 90 Theta and his own desperate resolve, saw it all. The core children were swarming, their forms coalescing, their dark eyes fixed on the surviving kin. Zila was not merely responding now. It was actively pushing them out, destroying them. "Guildmaster, we are under direct psychic attack," 90 Theta shrieked, its synthetic voice now full of pure, unadulterated terror. "The conduit is overflowing. Zyla is attempting to manifest physically." Kael heard the terror in 90 Theta's voice, a sound he had never thought possible from a Cognis kin unit. He saw the data streams from the spire turn crimson, indicating critical psychic overload. The connection was fraying. "Deploy the probes, 90 Theta. Immediately!" Kael roared, his own ancestor simulator throbbing violently against his skull. With a final, desperate surge, 90 Theta plunged the deep scan probes into the shimmering conduit. A flash of blinding light erupted, followed by a deafening, psychic feedback scream that reverberated through the hearth fire's maw, forcing kin crew members across the ship to their knees, clutching their heads in agony. Then, silence. A sudden, profound, unsettling silence. The psychic storm within the spire subsided. The core children, once swirling around them, froze, their forms becoming translucent again, inert, like statues carved from pure light. The conduit itself, though still pulsing, was quieter, its energy flow less chaotic. Cord, staggering, looked around. Ursa was still on the ground, her ancestor simulator glowing a dead, dull red. Fjord was weeping silently, his mind gone. 90. Theta was slumped against the conduit, its optical sensors dark, its multi-limbed chassis charred and sparking. But the probes, embedded deep within the conduit, were glowing, silently collecting data. 90 Theta! Report! Cord cried, stumbling towards the Cognis kin unit. A faint flicker. Then, a weak, distorted voice. Probes deployed. Data streaming. Exila disrupted. Primary conduit destabilized. Escape imperative. Cord knew what that meant. They had achieved their objective, but at a terrible cost. Ursa was lost. Fjord was a shell, and 90 Theta was severely damaged, likely irreparable. He had to get what was left of the team, and the invaluable data out. Dragging Fjord, and carrying the inert 90 Theta, Cord began the long, agonizing retreat. The city was silent now, But the silence was more terrifying than the screams. It was the silence of a sleeping god, temporarily appeased, but waiting to awaken. He knew, with a certainty that gnawed at his soul, that the battle was far from over. They had disrupted Xyla, but they had not defeated it. And the price of this small, tactical victory was yet another piece of the kin's precious sanity. The retreat from the central spire was a desperate, harrowing journey through the newly silent city. The cessation of Xyla's active psychic assault was not a relief, but a profound, unnerving absence. The previous cacophony of whispers and illusions, though maddening, had at least been an active threat. Now, the oppressive silence and the inert, spectral forms of the core children felt like the watchful stillness of a predator momentarily stunned, but preparing for a far more devastating strike. Sergeant Cord, hauling the unresponsive form of Cognis Kin 90 Theta and dragging the catatonic fjord, moved with a grim, practiced efficiency. His own mind was a battleground, the recent psychic assault leaving behind a searing headache and an unnerving echo of alien thoughts that clung to the fringes of his consciousness. Ursa lay dead, her ancestor simulator irreversibly shattered, a casualty of Xyla's direct mental blast. Her sacrifice, though tragic, had bought 90 Theta the precious seconds needed to deploy the deep scan probes. Back aboard the Hearthfire's Maw, Guildmaster Kale paced the command bridge, his features etched with profound anxiety. The psychic feedback that had surged through the ship during the probe's activation had been devastating, sending a shockwave of mental anguish through every kin. Many had collapsed, their ancestor simulators struggling to re-establish psychic dampening. The ship's internal systems, too, had flickered erratically, nearly suffering a cascade failure. "Status report, Chief Kinnick Zari," Kael barked, his voice raw. Zari, her own face pale and strained, sat hunched over her console, desperately trying to stabilize the data stream from 90 Theta's deployed probes. The feedback nearly overloaded the entire psychic dampening grid, Guildmaster. We're recovering, but slowly. The good news is the probes are transmitting data. Raw, unfiltered, but coming through. A few agonizing minutes later, Cord stumbled through the airlock, dragging Fjord and carrying the sparking shell of 90 Theta. Med Kin rushed to attend to Fjord, carefully disconnecting his corrupted ancestor simulator and preparing him for neural recalibration, a process that rarely restored full mental acuity. Kael knelt beside the damaged 90 Theta. "Report, Cognis Kin. Data status?" A weak, synthesized voice crackled from 90 Theta's damaged vocoder. "Critical systems, nominal. Deep scan probes, transmitting. Xyla, temporarily inert. Psychic emissions stabilized. Primary conduit disrupted, but regenerating. The sacrifice was not in vain, then, Kael muttered, his gaze falling upon the still form of Fjord. A Pyrrhic victory, indeed. Another kin lost, another mind broken, for a temporary reprieve and a trickle of data. The Votann's cold pragmatism felt like a distant, cruel whisper in the face of such immediate, personal loss. Over the next cycle, Chief Kinnick Zari and her team worked tirelessly to process the immense deluge of data streaming from the deep scan probes. What they discovered was both horrifying and profoundly enlightening. The probes, designed to map and analyze exotic energy signatures, had penetrated deep into Xyla's core, not just observing its emissions, but dissecting its very structure. Xyla is a hyper-complex psychic entity, Zari reported to Kael, her voice hushed with awe and dread. The hololith displayed an intricate, constantly shifting web of neural pathways, pulsing with raw warp energy. The core children are indeed components of this gestalt, like individual cells in a vast, interconnected brain. Their minds, warped by millennia of chronon exposure and raw Empyrean energy, formed a symbiotic, collective consciousness within the city's ancient power grid. She pointed to a particularly dense node within the projection. This central conduit, the one the probes disrupted, isn't just a power source. It's an organic technological interface. The city's original builders, in their misguided attempts to harness the core's energy, inadvertently created a massive psychic antenna. The core children, evolving within this closed ecosystem, naturally gravitated towards it, merging their nascent psychic abilities into this collective, giving birth to Xyla. So it's not truly malevolent? Kael asked, stroking his beard, his mind grappling with the alien nature of the entity. Not in the way we understand it, Zari confirmed. It reacts, it learns, it defends. But its consciousness is so fundamentally alien, so divorced from physical reality and conventional thought, that its actions are merely the ripples of its existence. When we intruded, its primary directive was self-preservation, the protection of its component minds. Our presence was a foreign body, a threat, and it reacted by projecting what it perceived as protective or deterrent measures. Our own fears, our own doubts, magnified and twisted. The probes had also transmitted stunning visual data, reconstructed from the city's vast databanks, now momentarily accessible due to Xyla's disruption. Images flickered across the hololith. Ancient human scientists, their faces filled with a blend of awe and hubris, constructing the city. Their ambition, to tap into the very fabric of nascent reality within the gas giant's core, to draw upon energies unknown. The tragedy, their complete ignorance of the warp, their hubris in playing with powers beyond their comprehension, their descendants, trapped within the chronon bubble, evolved into the core children, their bodies slowly transforming, their minds opening to the raw, untamed Empyrean. The data also revealed the core children's method of propagation. They didn't reproduce physically. Instead, when a kin's mind was sufficiently overwhelmed, when their ancestor simulator was compromised, a fragment of Azilah's collective consciousness would latch on to the kin's latent psychic potential, drawing them into the city, slowly transforming them into new core children, new components for the Gestalt. This was how Brock and Torvin had been lost, not killed, but absorbed. Kyle felt a chill that transcended the cold of the void. His kin were not just dying. They were being repurposed, assimilated into this alien collective. The thought was abhorrent, a violation of everything it meant to be kin. The disruption caused by the probes is temporary, Zari warned, pointing to the hololith, where the swirling patterns of Azilah were slowly beginning to recoalesce. Azilah is healing, adapting. It will learn from this, and its next psychic assault will be far more potent, more direct. The Pyrrhic victory had bought them time, but at a terrible cost. They had gained invaluable knowledge, but that knowledge only served to deepen the horror of their situation. Xila was not a foe that could be reasoned with or understood in human terms. It was a force of nature, a new evolutionary pathway for humanity, terrifying and alien. Kyle's decision to spare the city from immediate warp implosion was now being tested to its limits. The Votann's directives, though cold, were now screaming their validation. This entity, this Azilah, was too dangerous to exist. But they had glimpsed its origins, the tragic hubris of ancient humanity that had birthed it, and that knowledge, that fragment of understanding, now weighed heavily on Kyle's shoulders. We need a way to neutralize it, without simply destroying it, Zari, Kyle stated, his voice firm, resolute. A way to contain it, to stabilize its emissions, without sacrificing the invaluable historical data still locked within that city. The Votann demand eradication, but if we can present them with a solution that removes the threat and yields knowledge, they may be swayed. We owe it to Ursa, to Fjord, to all the kin whose minds have been shattered. Zari nodded, her eyes gleaming with the fierce light of intellectual challenge. I have a theory, Guildmaster, born from the very data the probes collected. Xyla thrives on uncontrolled warp energy. What if we could introduce a counterfrequency, something that dampens rather than destroys? A resonance. Nullifier. Kael looked at her, a glimmer of desperate hope in his eyes. A way out. A path that honored both the pragmatism of the Votann and the inherent kin drive for knowledge and preservation. But he knew such a device would require rare components, immense power, and a precision strike at the heart of Azila's being. Another plunge into the madness. The cost of this victory, the temporary disruption of Zila, was etched on the faces of every kin aboard the Hearthfire's maw. But it had also given them a new weapon, understanding. And in the grim darkness of the far future, even a sliver of understanding could be the most dangerous and most potent of tools. The aftermath of the second expedition, though costly, had delivered an unexpected bounty of knowledge. The deep scan probes, working through the charred remnants of 90 Theta, had not only disrupted Zila's core conduit, but had also tapped into the vast, ancient data banks woven into the very fabric of the Impossible So city. Chief Kinnick Zari, in the heavily shielded and newly reinforced Kinnick Labs, pored over the recovered data slates, her focus absolute, her mind racing with the implications. The data slates were not conventional storage devices. They were biocrystalline structures, living archives that pulsed with faint internal light, imbued with the Cronin particle technology that preserved the city. Deciphering them was a painstaking process, requiring advanced Kinnick xenotech and carefully calibrated ancestor interface protocols. But as the archaic human script and complex schematics began to resolve, a tragic, horrifying story unfolded. Guildmaster Kael. Zari's voice was barely a whisper, a tone of profound awe and sorrow. The archives are sentient. They contain not just data, but echoes of the original builder's consciousness, their hopes, their fears, their final, desperate thoughts. Kael entered the lab, the oppressive hum of the reinforced shielding barely muffling the residual psychic thrum of the core children. He looked at the flickering hololith, which now displayed not just complex energy patterns, but fragments of ancient Terran script and hauntingly beautiful, yet alien, imagery. "What have you found, Zari?" he asked, his voice low. "They were scientists," Zari began, her eyes fixed on the display. "Pre-age of strife, masters of theoretical physics and exotic energy manipulation. They discovered Xylos Prime, not for its minerals, but for its unique geological properties. Its core, they theorized, was not merely a molten heart, but a nascent nexus of reality, a place where the physical laws were fluid. They believed they could tap into this raw, primordial energy to power an unimaginable expansion of their empire. The hololith shifted, showing images of the ancient humans, their faces radiating a brilliant, almost messianic fervor. They were not the technologically regressed, superstitious humans of the Imperium, but the ambitious, near-omnipotent engineers of the dark age of technology, their hubris as vast as their intellect. They built this city, Zari continued, not as a colony, but as a colossal scientific instrument. The spire, Zila's central conduit, was designed to act as a cosmic tuning fork, to resonate with the core's energies and draw them forth. The chronon particles were deployed to create a stable, temporal bubble to slow down time within the city, allowing them centuries of undisturbed research within the gas giant's heart. Kael felt a cold dread spread through him, and they unleashed the warp. Precisely, Zari nodded, her gaze grim. They had no understanding of the Empyrean Guildmaster, no knowledge of the warp, no concept of psychic pollution. They were merely tapping into raw proto-reality, unaware that the very act was tearing open a conduit to the immaterium. The primordial energy they sought was the raw, untamed chaos of the nascent warp, before the birth of the ruinous powers, before the Imperium, before even our own ancestor cores were fully formed. The data slates then shifted to a new, more terrifying sequence. The initial experiments, successful beyond the scientists' wildest dreams. The city pulsed with energy. But then, the first anomalies, minor psychological disturbances among the researchers, visions, whispers, then the gradual physical changes, their skin growing pallid, their eyes deepening, their minds expanding, becoming more sensitive, more porous to the psychic energies they had unleashed. They were mutating, Kael observed, his voice hushed, becoming psychic. And not just psychic, Guildmaster, Zari corrected, her voice filled with a profound pity. They were being absorbed, their individual consciousnesses exposed to raw, unmitigated warp energy for millennia, began to merge. The chronon bubble kept them physically stable, but their minds were caught in a perpetual, accelerating feedback loop, interweaving, blending, until individual identity dissolved into the collective. The final fragments of the archive were the most haunting. Journal entries from the last surviving unmerged scientist, scrawled with increasing desperation. Pleas for help. Warnings of the thought sea that was consuming them all. Descriptions of their own children, born within the city, emerging with eyes of pure light, their minds already part of the nascent collective. The final entry was a single, despairing image. A human hand reaching out, its fingers dissolving into shimmering light. A last desperate grasp at individuality before being subsumed. The core children, Zari concluded, gesturing to the hololith, which now displayed an image of one of the ethereal, luminous beings, its dark eyes filled with ancient, alien sorrow. They are the descendants of those scientists, evolved, transformed. Not born of a single lineage, but a collective consciousness. Exilah is simply the inevitable culmination of that process. A vast, communal intelligence born from the desperate hubris of a lost age, powered by the core of a gas giant, and nourished by the raw, untamed warp. The knowledge hit Kale like a physical blow. The core children were not malevolent monsters, nor were they simple Xenos. They were a tragic testament to humanity's boundless ambition and equally boundless capacity for self-destruction. They were a cautionary tale, preserved in a temporal bubble, a living monument to the dangers of the unchecked pursuit of power. They are lost, Kael stated, the weight of millennia of kin pragmatism in his voice. Irredeemably so. They are an existential threat to any organic life that encounters them. The Votann's directive was correct. But, Zari interjected, they also represent an unprecedented opportunity, Guildmaster. This city, this Chronon bubble, this unique evolutionary path. It is a living laboratory of pre-age of strife, technology, and warp phenomena. Understanding Exilah, not just neutralizing it, could provide invaluable data for the Votann. Data on the nascent warp, on human psychic evolution, on lost chronon tech. Knowledge that could empower the Kulg Orn hold for millennia. Kael looked at the hololith, at the images of ancient humans, their faces full of a doomed ambition. He thought of the price already paid by his kin. The minds shattered, the lives assimilated. He thought of the Votann, their cold, calculating intellects weighing the cost of such an anomaly against the value of its secrets. He had defied them once, for the sake of discovery. Now, the discovery itself presented a new, even deeper dilemma. To destroy Exilah was to destroy a unique archive of the galactic past. To contain it, to study it, was to risk further madness, further casualties, and the terrifying possibility that Azila, having learned, might one day break free. The resonance nullifier, Zari, Kyle said, his voice firm, decisive. Can it contain, rather than simply destroy Xyla? Can it stabilize the warp emissions without annihilating the core children or the city's structure? Zari nodded, a flicker of fierce determination in her eyes. Theoretically, yes. The data from these archives provides new insights into the city's energy conduits. If we can precisely tune the nullifier, we can create a counter-frequency that disrupts Exila's access to the raw warp and sever its connection to the collective consciousness. It would essentially put Zila to sleep, render the core children inert, their psychic emanations silenced, but otherwise preserved within their temporal bubble. It was an audacious plan, requiring another, even more perilous, deep core incursion. But it was a kin plan, a solution that aimed not for simple destruction, but for control, for preservation of knowledge, even in the face of immense danger. The ancient, silent archives of Xylos Prime had whispered their tragic tale, and in doing so, had offered a desperate, fragile hope for a pragmatic resolution. The weight of that hope, and the immense danger it entailed, settled heavily upon Guildmaster Kyle's shoulders. The Votann's judgment would be severe, no matter the outcome. But for the kin of the Kulg Orn hold, the pursuit of knowledge, even the most dangerous knowledge, was an ancestral imperative. Chief Kinich Zari, invigorated by the insights gleaned from the ancient archives, threw herself into the theoretical development of the resonance nullifier. Her laboratory, a heavily shielded annex deep within the Hearthfire's maw, became a whirlwind of hololith projections, complex energy diagrams, and the incessant hum of diagnostic tools. She was driven by a fierce intellectual curiosity, tempered by the grim realities of their predicament. The nullifier was their only hope, the kin way to resolve an impossible conundrum. The principle is elegant in its complexity, Guildmaster, Zari explained to Kyle, who now spent more time in the Kinnick labs than on the command bridge. The subtle psychic pressure from Ezila still pervaded the ship, necessitating Kyle's presence near the most shielded areas. Xyla's power comes from its direct, uncontrolled siphon of raw warp energy through the central spire's conduits. The nullifier, if properly calibrated, would generate a focused counter-frequency, an anti-warp pulse that would resonate with Xyla's specific psychic signature. It wouldn't destroy the core children, but disrupt their collective consciousness, severing their connection to the warp and each other, effectively rendering them inert. The hololith in the lab displayed a pulsating, intricate device. It was an amalgamation of kin xenotech and reverse-engineered elements from the ancient Terran archives, graviton lenses for focused energy projection, molecular dampeners to stabilize warp flux, and specialized chronon particle emitters to maintain the integrity of the temporal bubble during activation. Its design was a masterpiece of desperate ingenuity, a testament to the kin's boundless capacity for engineering solutions even in the face of cosmic horror. The challenge, however, Zari continued, is the precision. Xyla is immensely powerful. An imprecise activation could either have no effect or, worse, cause a catastrophic feedback loop, destabilizing the entire chronon bubble and unleashing Xyla's full, untamed power upon the entire system. The construction of the nullifier demanded an array of incredibly rare and exotic components. Graviton shunt coils, harvested from unstable stellar remnants, psycho-reactive crystals, found only in the most obscure warp-tainted asteroids, and most critically, a sufficient quantity of chronon particles requiring a delicate, dangerous extraction from the very temporal bubble of the ancient city itself. The chronon particles are the key, Guildmaster, Zari emphasized. They are the building blocks of the city's temporal stability. We need to extract them from within the city, from the very structures that power Xyla. It will require another deep core expedition. And this time, we need to go to the heart of Xyla's domain, to its deepest energy wells. Kael felt a grim resolve settle over him. Another expedition. More kin risked, perhaps lost. But the alternative, the slow descent into madness, or the blunt, destructive force of the Votann's warp implosion, was simply unacceptable. This was their chance, fragile as it was, to solve the problem in a way that honored the kin's pursuit of knowledge and their pragmatic preservation of resources. Sergeant Cord, still recovering from the previous incursion, his eyes haunted, but his resolve unbroken, volunteered to lead the chronon extraction team. "My ancestors demand it, Guildmaster," he stated, his voice firm. "We broke this world. We will fix it. And if this nullifier is our best chance, then I will get you what you need." He chose only the most mentally resilient kin, those who had demonstrated an uncanny ability to resist Xyla's psychic probes, or whose ancestor simulators were unusually robust. Among them was the newly repaired and upgraded Cognis-Kin Unit 90 Theta, its optical sensors now glowing with a sharper, more focused light. The Chronon extraction mission was even more perilous than the previous incursions. Zila, having learned from their previous disruption, had intensified its psychic defense. The very fabric of reality within the city seemed to warp and distort around the kin team. Illusions of friends becoming foes, of tunnels collapsing, of the void itself opening to swallow them whole, were constant. But Cord's team, armed with enhanced psychic dampeners and a new type of reality anchor field emitter designed by Zari, pushed through, their focus absolute. They drilled directly into the deepest, most stable Chronon wells, places where the temporal energies were so dense that time itself seemed to stand still. The air around them shimmered, distorting their vision, making every movement a deliberate, painstaking effort. The core children were everywhere, their forms now almost solid, their dark eyes fixed on the intruders with a palpable, unsettling awareness. We are encountering residual consciousness within the Chronon wells, 90 Theta reported, its voice strained as it began the delicate extraction process. Fragments of the original human scientists, echoes of their final thoughts, their despair. They are clinging to these particles, unwilling to be fully subsumed by Zila. Cord felt a profound pang of pity. To be trapped, a mere echo, clinging to the very temporal energy that had doomed them, was a fate he wouldn't wish on his most hated foe. It reinforced the imperative of their mission, to silence Zila, not out of malice, but out of a grim necessity, to bring peace to these lost souls. After agonizing hours, battling not just psychic projections, but the pervasive sense of temporal disorientation, the team successfully extracted enough Chronon particles. They returned to the Hearthfire's maw, their bodies weary, their minds battered, but their mission accomplished. With the final component acquired, Zari's team began the meticulous process of assembling and calibrating the resonance nullifier. The device was massive, requiring an entire repurposed cargo bay to house its intricate mechanisms. Its heart was a pulsating core of psycho-reactive crystals, humming with barely contained energy, waiting to unleash its precise counter-frequency. Kyle watched, his heart heavy, as the nullifier neared completion. This was their gamble, their hope, the light in the endless night. But the path to its deployment was still fraught with peril. It required another, final push into the heart of Zila, to the central spire, to activate the nullifier at the very nexus of its power. And Ixila, having adapted, having learned, would surely be waiting. The hearth fire's maw braced itself, its reinforced bulkheads humming with newly charged energy, its remaining kin crew grimly preparing for the ultimate confrontation. The Votann's judgment loomed, but so did the chance for a true kin victory. Not just survival, but understanding, and the containment of a galactic horror without resorting to its utter annihilation. It was a flickering candle of hope against the infinite darkness. The hearth fire's maw had ceased to be a mining vessel, a fortress, or even a research outpost. It was now a besieged vessel, a lone bastion of sanity floating on an ocean of psychic madness. The temporary disruption caused by the deep scan probes had ended. Xyla, having adapted with terrifying speed and intelligence, was now more active, more malicious, and infinitely more potent than ever before. The long war had truly begun. A war not of attrition, but of existential dread. The psychic emissions, once a pervasive hum, were now a constant, directed assault. Xyla, having learned the weaknesses of the kin, no longer relied on generalized fear or disorienting whispers. Instead, it launched focused, targeted attacks, exploiting the deepest anxieties and darkest memories of individual kin. The ancestor simulators, once a source of unwavering guidance, were now desperately struggling, their internal dampeners pushed to their absolute limits. The patterns are becoming distinct, Guildmaster, Chief Kynik Zari reported, her voice strained from ceaseless analysis. The hololith in Kyle's command chamber swirled with increasingly aggressive psychic signatures, originating from the city's heart. Sila is not merely broadcasting, it's actively probing, mapping the neural pathways of our kin. It's creating bespoke psychic illusions, tailored to inflict maximum mental and emotional damage. The effects were devastating. Ironkin, usually impervious to psychological warfare, were found in their quarters, meticulously disassembling their own power suits, convinced that each component harbored the vengeful spirit of a fallen ancestor. Hearthkin warriors, standing watch, would suddenly abandon their posts, driven by phantom cries for help from their families, light years away. Even the usually stoic Thuri fell victim. One venerable elder, his beard gray with countless cycles, spent an entire shift conversing with an imaginary ancestor, believing the Votann themselves were speaking directly to him, urging him to open the airlock and embrace the light. He had to be physically restrained, his ancestor simulator undergoing a forced reset that risked permanent neural damage. Sleep was a luxury none could afford. Nightmares, so vivid they felt like waking reality, plagued the crew. They saw themselves betraying their kin, abandoning their honor, or being slowly assimilated into the shimmering forms of the core children, their individuality dissolving into the vast, alien collective, the cloying sweetness in the air, a constant reminder of the city's presence, now tasted like bile in their mouths. "Morale is plummeting, Guildmaster," Sergeant Cord reported, his own eyes showing the strain of sleepless cycles and constant mental vigilance. His team, once a unit of grim determination, was now a group of haunted, wary individuals, each fighting their own invisible battle. The kin are losing faith in the dampeners, in the ancestor simulators. They feel exposed, undefended. Kyle felt the despair seep into his own soul. He battled his own demons, the subtle whispers that promised release, the tempting visions of a peaceful, silent absorption into Xylah's collective mind. He relied heavily on his ancestor simulator, pushing its dampening field to its maximum, feeling the strain of its constant battle against the encroaching madness. The Votann's direct channels remained silent, but Kyle knew their ancient minds were observing, calculating. Their patience was finite. The resonance nullifier, though nearing completion, was still a monumental undertaking. Each component, each delicate calibration, had to be performed under extreme duress, with engineers and kynics fighting their own inner battles against Xylah's relentless assault. Errors were made, circuits fried, and progress slowed to a crawl. The chronon particle emitters are proving difficult to integrate, Zari explained, gesturing to a flickering component within the nullifier's frame. The raw energies from the core, channeled through the city's conduits, are interfering with our temporal stabilization fields. We need more precise control over the power input, a direct bypass to Xylah's main power nexus. This meant another incursion, not just into the city, but into the central spire itself, to construct a dedicated power conduit for the nullifier, a direct, surgical strike against Xylah's very nervous system. It was an act of profound desperation. As the weeks bled into months, the Hearthfire's maw became a ghost ship. The once bustling corridors were quiet, the workshops largely empty, save for the kynics tirelessly working on the nullifier. Most kin were confined to their quarters, their ancestor simulators set to maximum dampening, simply trying to weather the relentless psychic storm. The very air seemed to hum with the low-frequency thrum of Xylah's intelligence, a constant reminder of its omnipresent awareness. Kyle walked the deserted command bridge, the hololith showing Xylos Prime, a swirling gas giant with a single, glowing anomaly at its heart. He looked at the vastness of the void, at the indifferent stars, and felt the immense isolation of their struggle. They were alone, deep within a world, fighting an enemy that was both ancient and utterly alien. Guildmaster, Cord's voice crackled over the comm link, pulling Kyle from his reverie. We have another incident. Grav Kin Unit 55S attempted to vent himself into the planet's core, said he heard the song of creation calling him. Kyle closed his eyes, a wave of profound weariness washing over him. Another one. The numbers were dwindling. The kin were breaking. His defiance of the Votann, his stubborn refusal to deploy the blunt instrument of warp implosion, was costing him his kin, one mind at a time. The guilt was a heavy weight on his soul. He knew his time was running out. The Votann would not tolerate such losses indefinitely, even for the sake of knowledge. Their pragmatism, though cold, was ultimately about the survival and prosperity of the kin. If the Hearthfire's maw and its crew were deemed irrecoverable, the Beta Lambda protocol would be enacted remotely, regardless of Kyle's wishes, annihilating everything. Kyle returned to Zari's lab, his face grim, his resolve hardening. Chief Kinnick, he said, his voice flat. The nullifier. Is it ready for deployment? The final phase? Zari looked up, her face etched with exhaustion, but her eyes burning with a desperate, almost manic intensity. Almost, Guildmaster. We need one final push to install the primary power conduit deep within the spire, and then we can activate it. One chance. One strike. Kyle nodded. He knew what that meant. A suicide mission. But it was their only chance. He had gambled, and he had lost much. But he would not allow his kin to be consumed. Not completely. They would make their stand, not with brute force, but with ingenuity. And if they failed, the last thing the Votann would see from the Hearthfire's maw would be a flicker of desperate hope, extinguished in the all-consuming darkness. The long war was reaching its brutal, desperate climax. Guildmaster Kale stood before a reinforced hololith display, his gaze fixed on the image of Xyla's pulsating central spire. The Votann's presence, usually a subtle, guiding hum, had become a cold, analytical pressure, a relentless query of his actions. He was risking not just his command, but potentially the ire of the Kulg Orn hold itself, for his continued deviation from their uncompromising directives. Yet, the price of blind obedience, the wholesale annihilation of Xylos Prime, and the loss of invaluable ancient knowledge gnawed at his pragmatic kin soul. He was a guild master, a leader responsible for his kin, but also a seeker of knowledge, a steward of the ancestral ways. The weight of this burden, the countless kin lost to Xyla's insidious touch, the slow erosion of sanity throughout the hearth fires, pressed down upon him. He often found himself reliving the terrified screams of Brock and Torvin, the vacant eyes of Fjord, the catatonic state of Grav Kin 55S. His own ancestor simulator, usually a beacon of calm wisdom, now thrummed with a discordant anxiety, the ghost of alien thoughts clinging to its circuits. He was tired, bone-weary in a way that sleep could not touch, but his resolve remained unbroken. Sergeant Cord, now visibly scarred by the psychological warfare, stood beside him, a silent sentinel. Cord's face, once gruff and pragmatic, now bore the lines of profound suffering, but also an unyielding determination. He had lost kin under his command, seen their minds shatter, and the guilt was a heavy shadow in his eyes. But he also understood Kael's defiance, his desperate hope for a better way. "The team is ready, Guildmaster." Cord's voice was hoarse, but steady. He had personally trained them, selecting only the most resilient, those whose ancestor simulators were still fighting, however desperately. These were the kin who understood the cost and were willing to pay it. They understand the mission. Install the nullifier's primary power conduit. It's a precise task, requires a steady hand and a clear mind. Among the team was Chief Kinnick Zari herself, a bold and unprecedented decision for a Kinnick of her standing. But Kael knew that the precise calibration and installation of the conduit, the very heart of the resonance nullifier, could only be entrusted to her. She was the architect of their salvation, and she would see it through. Cognis Kin 90 Theta, its repaired and upgraded chassis humming with renewed power, would accompany her, its advanced sensors crucial for navigating Zila's final, most potent defenses. Kael turned to Zari, his eyes meeting hers. "Are you certain, Kinnick? The risks are immense." Zari nodded, her expression resolute. "The calculations are complete, Guildmaster. The nullifier is at peak readiness, but its activation must be precisely timed, precisely anchored to Xyla's central energy flow. I must be there." She held up a small, crystal-encased device, glowing faintly with chronon energy. "This is the trigger. Once the conduit is secured, I activate this, and the nullifier begins its sequence. The plan was simple in its audacity. Kord's assault team would clear a path through Xylah's final defense, drawing its attention and soaking up its psychic barrages. Zari, protected by a dedicated Ironkin bodyguard, would then make a daring dash to the central spire, accessing the heart of Xylah's power to install the conduit. It was a race against time, against madness, and against the Votann's looming judgment. "Guild Master," Kord said, his voice low, "I request permission to lead the diversion. I know the horrors of that place. My kin, they will need a shield." Kyle looked at Kord, at the weary but determined faces of the kin assembled. He knew he was asking them to walk into hell, armed with little more than courage and a desperate hope. He clenched his fists, the weight of command pressing down on him. His ancestor, Simulator, usually a source of calm, now throbbed with a sense of impending doom. "Permission granted, Sergeant Kord," Kyle finally replied, his voice heavy with emotion. "You lead the diversion. Zari, you have your orders. The fate of this vessel, the fate of all we have learned, rests on your shoulders. May the ancestors guide your steps." As the kin prepared for their final, desperate assault, the hearth fire's maw itself groaned under the increasing psychic pressure. Hull plates warped, lights flickered, and the constant hum of Exilah's presence was a palpable, physical force. It was as if the gas giant itself was screaming, aware of the monumental struggle unfolding within its core. Kyle walked amongst his kin, offering a stoic nod to each one. He saw their fear, but also their unyielding resolve. They were kin of the Kulg Orn hold, and though they might be broken, they would not bend, not easily. Their ancestors demanded nothing less. He returned to the command bridge, the air thick with tension. His hand instinctively went to his ancestor simulator, feeling its strained hum. He had defied the Votann, gambled everything on a fragile hope. And now the time had come to see if that gamble would pay off, or if Xylah would consume them all, leaving behind only another forgotten tragedy in the grim vastness of the galaxy. The silence of the command bridge was punctuated only by the strained whirring of the ship's systems and the rhythmic thrum of Xylah's growing power. The stage was set. The final act was about to begin. The hearth fires. Maw buckled. Xylah, having fully recovered from the probe disruption and now acutely aware of the kin's intent, unleashed a psychic surge of unprecedented magnitude. It was not merely a wave of whispers or tailored illusions. It was a focused, sustained blast of raw warp energy, a mental scream that threatened to tear the ship's void shields and the very minds of its crew asunder. Alarms blared across the maw, not just for physical damage, but for psychic overload. Lights flickered violently, then died in whole sections of the ship. The colossal void shields, designed to deflect stellar flares, now pulsed with an erratic crimson glow as they struggled against an immaterial assault. Kin across the vessel dropped to their knees, clutching their heads, their ancestor simulators wailing in protest, their eyes rolling back in their heads as Xylah's power flooded their minds. Void shields at 60% and dropping, Guildmaster. L, the Cognis Kin unit on the bridge, reported, its synthesized voice showing genuine distress. Psychic dampeners overloaded, casualties mounting across all sectors. Xylah is attempting a full mental breach. Kael, strapped into his command chair, felt the assault directly. His ancestor simulator screamed a high-pitched whine, its dampening field barely holding. He saw visions of the hearthfire's maw being torn apart, not by external force, but by the raw, unfathomable power of Xylah, its structure dissolving into shimmering motes of light as its kin crew were absorbed, their minds subsumed into the collective. The cloying sweetness in the air now tasted metallic, acrid, like fear itself. "Hold the line!" Kael roared into the comlink, his voice strained, fighting against the invading mental noise. "All available power to void shields and psychic dampeners. Cord, Zari, report." Sergeant Cord's assault team had already entered the city. The airlock had cycled moments before Xylah's great surge, plunging them into the full, unmitigated horror of the core children's final defense. The city, usually bathed in ethereal light, now pulsed with an angry, malevolent glow. The spectral forms of the core children were everywhere, no longer translucent or flickering, but fully manifested, their shapes shifting and distorting into grotesque, nightmarish mockeries of kin warriors, of demons, of ancient, forgotten terrors. "We're in, Guildmaster." But Xylah is active, mass manifestations. Cord's voice crackled through the comlink, distorted by static and psychic interference. "The city is alive. They're hitting us with everything." Xylah knew. It knew their intent, their destination. It was fighting back with a fury born of pure, alien self-preservation. The very ground beneath Cord's team seemed to shift, conjuring impossible chasms and phantom obstacles. Walls of shimmering light erupted to block their path, filled with the screaming faces of their lost comrades. Cord led the diversion, his bolter roaring, its shots tearing through the ephemeral forms of the core children, which dissipated into shimmering light only to reform instantly. He pushed forward, drawing Zilah's attention, shouting commands, his mind a fortress of grim determination against the storm. He saw one of his hearthkin, Torque, drop to his knees, his eyes wide and vacant, his ancestor simulator glowing with an unstable, corrupted red. "Torque! No!" Cord cried. But there was nothing he could do. Torque was gone, his mind consumed, already beginning to shimmer as his form dissolved into the luminous energy of the core children. Meanwhile, Chief Kynik Zari, protected by a team of Ironkin bodyguards, pressed towards the central spire. Her mind, though highly disciplined and reinforced by Cognis Kin 90 Theta, was under immense pressure. The air was thick with static, with the echoes of ancient human despair, with the alien rage of Zilah. The crystal trigger for the nullifier in her hand pulsed with an insistent light, a promise of salvation. "The spire is heavily defended, Guildmaster." Zari's voice, though strained, held an edge of fierce determination. "Zilah is concentrating its power here. 90 Theta is maintaining a localized dampening field, but it's weakening." As they reached the entrance to the spire, Zilah unleashed its ultimate defense. A single, colossal entity began to coalesce directly in their path. It was a being of pure light and shadow, towering over them, its form constantly shifting, encompassing the faces of all the assimilated kin, of the ancient human scientists, of every lost soul that comprised Zilah, its eyes burning with an alien intelligence and an infinite sorrow, fixed upon Zari. It did not speak, but a thought, vast and ancient, resonated directly in Zari's mind. "You seek to silence us, to destroy us. We are the inheritors. We are the truth of this place. We seek to stabilize you," Zari screamed back, though her voice was drowned out by the psychic storm. "To save you from your own destructive existence. Your raw power will consume this world." The towering entity ignored her words. It reached out a shimmering, ethereal hand, its touch not physical, but a direct assault on Zari's mind. A probe seeking to consume her, to assimilate her, just as it had consumed so many others. "Kinnick, get back!" An Ironkin warrior, Grav, bellowed, slamming his power axe into the shimmering arm. The axe passed through harmlessly, but the act of defiance briefly distorted the entity's form, momentarily weakening its psychic grip on Zari. "We need to get to the Nexus," Zari urged, pushing forward. Cognis Kin, 90 Theta's dampening field, flickering around her like a desperate halo. The Iron Kin fought a losing battle, their physical weapons useless against the manifesting core children, their minds slowly being eroded by Xyla's relentless assault. Back on the Hearthfire's maw, the void shields were screaming, now at 30%, crackling with unstable energy. Hull breaches were appearing across the ship, not from physical impacts, but from spontaneous reality distortions, tears in the fabric of space-time caused by Xyla's immense, untamed power. The atmosphere alarms were blaring, oxygen levels dropping in critical sectors. "We're losing containment, Guildmaster," El shrieked. "Xyla's emissions are propagating beyond the core. Detection on Xylos Prime's outer atmosphere. The entire system is at risk." Kyle felt a crushing wave of despair. His gamble, his defiance, was failing. Xyla was breaking free, threatening to unleash its maddening power upon the entire system, potentially attracting the attention of far greater horrors in the Empyrean. The Votann's ruthless pragmatism, the Beta Lambda Protocol, was looking less like a harsh sentence and more like a necessary salvation. He slammed his fist on the console. "Cord! Zari! Status report! We are at the brink!" Through the deafening psychic storm, through the crackling comlink, Kyle heard Cord's defiant roar, still fighting the manifesting core children, still drawing Xyla's wrath. And then Zari's voice, strained but clear. "We're almost there, Guildmaster. One final push. 90 Theta, full power to dampeners. Iron Kin, hold the line." The battle raged, a desperate, final stand against an enemy that blurred the lines between thought and reality. The Hearthfire's maw was dying, its kin breaking, but the last remnants of their hope, embodied in Zari and Cord, pushed on, towards the heart of Xyla, towards salvation or utter annihilation. The darkest hour had descended, and the fate of Xylos Prime, and perhaps much more, hung precariously in the balance. The Hearthfire's maw screamed its death throes. Void shields flickered and collapsed, leaving gaping wounds in the ship's psychic defenses. Hull plates buckled under unseen forces, and critical systems went offline in a cascade of sparking conduits and flashing alarms. Xyla's full, untamed power was being unleashed, not just upon the deep core vessel, but upon the very fabric of reality around Xylos Prime, threatening to tear the gas giant itself into a warp-tainted maelstrom. On the command bridge, Guildmaster Kale fought a losing battle against the encroaching madness. His ancestor simulator, pushed beyond its limits, was emitting a high-pitched, desperate wail that only he could hear. Visions of the Maw's catastrophic failure, of his kin being subsumed into shimmering light, of an empty, mocking void, flooded his mind. He clung to the command chair, his knuckles white, his beard matted with sweat, his eyes fixed on the flickering hololith feed from the central spire. Void shields at 10%. Critical atmospheric pressure loss in sectors Alpha 3 through Gamma 9. Engine core fluctuating. Grav drives experiencing severe feedback. L's voice, usually calm and measured, was now riddled with a frantic urgency, a mechanical echo of pure panic. Xylah's psychic emissions have reached interstellar space. Uncontrolled warp phenomena reported across the system. This is an extinction-level event. Within the heart of the impossible city, the scene was one of utter chaos. Sergeant Cord's diversionary team, battered and broken, fought against the relentless tide of manifesting core children. Xylah's titanic, shimmering avatar dominated the central plaza, its spectral limbs slashing out, each touch a mental violation, each glance a descent into madness. Cord's remaining hearthkin were falling, one by one, their ancestor simulators burning out, their forms dissolving into the ethereal energy of the core children, adding their fragmented consciousnesses to the gestalt. Fall back to Zari's position, Cord roared, his voice raw, his bolter spitting desperate bursts of energy into the void. His own ancestor simulator was barely functioning. A frantic, warning thrumming against his skull. He saw his remaining kin overwhelmed, their defiance fading into acceptance as Xylah's influence claimed them. He was alone, a single, defiant bulwark against an ocean of alien thought. Chief Kynik Zari, protected by a single, determined iron kin, Grav, struggled through the final meters to the central conduit within the spire. The air around them was electric, with pure, raw warp energy. The floor pulsed beneath their feet. The towering avatar of Xylah was focused on Cord's brave, doomed stand, its attention momentarily drawn from Zari's precise, surgical objective. Almost there, Zari gasped, her face pale, her hands trembling, as she braced the nullifier's primary power conduit against the shimmering surface of Xylah's core nexus. Cognis Kin 90 Theta, its chassis sparking, its internal systems screaming, poured all its remaining processing power into maintaining a minuscule dampening field around Zari, a fragile bubble of sanity in a universe of madness. "It knows, Kinnick. It's reacting," Grav bellowed, his power axe humming, his shield arms scorched from a near-physical psychic blast. He had seen the horrors of the galaxy, faced down demons and Xenos, but this was different. This was pure, unadulterated terror of the mind. He knew his end was near, but his loyalty to Zari, to the kin, was absolute. The towering avatar of Exila, sensing Zari's imminent success, shifted its attention, its vast, dark eyes focusing on her. A wave of pure, concentrated psychic force slammed into Grav, shattering his shield arm, his power armor groaning under the impossible pressure. He was lifted from his feet, slammed against the spire wall, his ancestor simulator exploding in a shower of sparks and corrupted data. He fell, utterly broken, but his last, defiant act had bought Zari precious seconds. "Grav!" Zari cried, but there was no time. The conduit was nearly secured. She fumbled for the crystal trigger, her fingers slick with sweat. Then, Sergeant Cord, a lone, desperate figure, appeared at the entrance of the spire, his bolter empty, his face a mask of primal fury. He saw Zari, saw the colossal avatar of Exila bearing down on her, and saw the shattered form of Grav, his ancestor simulator, pushed to the absolute breaking point, still held a fragment of defiant, desperate will. "For the ancestors!" Cord roared, a sound that seemed to tear through the psychic cacophony, a guttural cry of pure kin defiance. He hurled his empty bolter at Zila's avatar, a futile, pathetic gesture, but it drew the entity's attention, if only for an instant. Exila's shimmering form recoiled slightly, its focus momentarily shifting to this enraged, insignificant insect. In that fraction of a second, Zari plunged the crystal trigger into the conduit. A blinding flash erupted from the nullifier. A wave of pure, stabilizing energy, precisely calibrated to Xyla's unique psychic signature, pulsed outwards. It wasn't a destructive force, but an anti-frequency, a counter-melody designed to silence the discordant symphony of Xyla's collective mind. The towering avatar of Xyla screamed. Not a sound, but a psychic shriek that overloaded every sensor, every mind, every ancestor simulator within 1,000,000 kilometers. It was a cry of profound pain, of a vast, ancient consciousness being torn apart, piece by piece. Its shimmering form convulsed, flickering violently, struggling against the stabilizing energies. The core children throughout the city shrieked in unison, their forms solidifying, then dissolving into pure light. The nullifier pulsed again, its energy wave expanding, filling the entire city, washing over the core children. Their forms froze, mid-transformation, like statues of light and shadow, inert, their psychic emanations cut off, silenced. Xylah's colossal avatar shrank, convulsed, then shattered into a million fragments of light, dissipating into the luminous air. The overwhelming psychic pressure ceased. The maddening whispers faded. A profound, unsettling silence descended upon the city, upon the hearth fire's maw, upon the entire system. Kyle, on the bridge, slumped in his command chair, gasping for breath. The screaming of his ancestor simulator had stopped, replaced by a dull, aching thrum. The void shields of the maw, though still heavily damaged, held. The systems, though battered, were no longer screaming. The emissions have ceased, Guildmaster, El reported, its voice weak, almost awed. Xylah is silent. The nullifier is active. Stabilization protocols nominal. Zari, exhausted but alive, slumped against the now inert conduit, the crystal trigger still in her hand. Cord, too, collapsed, his body trembling, his mind utterly spent, but alive. They had done it. They had bought silence, but at an immense, agonizing cost. The kin had achieved a victory, but it was a victory steeped in tragedy. The impossible city, now a beautiful, haunting mausoleum of light, was silent. The core children, the descendants of ambitious, doomed humans, were at peace, their maddening psychic song finally quieted. But the silence came at the price of shattered minds, valiant sacrifices, and the deep, abiding trauma etched upon the souls of the surviving kin. The greatest darkness was often found not in destruction, but in the profound, terrible silence of what was left behind. A profound, unnerving silence descended upon Xylos Prime, the cacophony of Xylah's psychic assault, the whispers of madness, the screams of the hearth fire's maw, dying systems, all were gone. What remained was a stillness so absolute, so complete, that it felt heavier than any storm. The resonance. Nullifier pulsed with a soft, steady hum from the heart of the ancient city, maintaining its counter-frequency, holding the collective consciousness of the core children in a state of inert, quiescent stasis. The aftermath aboard the hearth fire's maw was one of stark, grim survival. The ship was a wreck, its outer hull pitted and scored by spontaneous reality distortions, its internal systems patched with desperate emergency repairs. Whole sections of the vessel were depressurized, oxygen scrubbers damaged, grav plates malfunctioning. The maw, once a titan of industry, was now a crippled ghost, limping through the core of a gas giant. But the true devastation was not physical. It was mental. Of the hundreds of kin who had started this deep core expedition, nearly half were gone, consumed by Xyla, lost to the void during the system failures, or irrevocably broken by the psychic onslaught. Those who remained were shadows of their former selves. Their faces were hollow, their eyes distant, haunted by horrors only they could perceive. Their ancestor simulators, though no longer screaming, thrummed with a damaged, discordant frequency, forever marked by the alien presence they had encountered. Chief Kinnick Zari, though physically unharmed, was utterly exhausted. She supervised the meticulous process of assessing the nullifier's stability, her mind still reeling from the direct confrontation with Xyla's avatar. She worked alongside the few surviving Kinnicks, their hands trembling as they recalibrated circuits and monitored energy flows. The city, now bathed in the nullifier's gentle glow, was a silent, beautiful tomb. The core children remained frozen, their ethereal forms like sculptures of light, captured forever in their final, tragic moments. Sergeant Cord was among the survivors, pulled from the central spire by an emergency rescue team after the nullifier's activation. He was physically intact, but his mind was a shattered mosaic of memories and lingering trauma. He spoke little, his eyes often unfocused, staring into distances only he could see. His ancestor simulator, miraculously, still functioned, but it was a damaged thing, struggling to reassert order to a mind that had seen too much. He carried the weight of his fallen kin, the screams of Torque, the sacrifice of Grav, etched into his very soul. Guildmaster Kyle, though physically weary, carried the heaviest burden. He had defied the Votann, and while his decision had ultimately contained Xyla without utter annihilation, the cost in kin lives, and sanity was immense. He walked the damaged corridors of the maw, seeing the empty bunks, the deserted workstations, the haunted eyes of those who remained. The silence of the ship was punctuated by the quiet sobs of a few kin, unable to hold back their grief any longer. The Votann's response will be severe, Guildmaster. L, its voice now carefully modulated to mask its own damaged systems, reported to Kale as he surveyed the wreckage of the command bridge. Our failure to follow direct orders, combined with the extensive loss of kin and resources, will warrant a full Kulg Orn hold inquiry. Kael merely nodded, his gaze fixed on the hololith, which displayed the inert city. Let them come. We faced an unknown enemy, El. We chose a path of knowledge over simple destruction. The cost was high, but the information we gained, the threat we contained, it will serve the ancestors in ways they cannot yet comprehend. The surviving kin, under Kael's quiet, grim leadership, began the slow, arduous process of repairing the hearth fire's maw. It was a labor of grief and grim determination. Each bolt tightened, each circuit mended. A silent act of defiance against the horrors they had faced. They salvaged what they could, recycled the wreckage, turning the shattered remnants of their vessel into a testament to their unwavering will. The city, though silent, was not abandoned. Zari oversaw the installation of automated monitoring systems, carefully designed to withstand the chronon bubble's strange temporal effects. These systems would continuously stream data back to the Hearthfire's maw, providing invaluable insights into the ancient city's technology, the unique properties of the core children in their inert state, and the ongoing stability of the nullifier. It was a permanent archive, a profound library of a forgotten age, now held in eternal stasis. The bodies of the fallen kin were recovered where possible, their ancestor simulators carefully extracted. Those who had been consumed by Zila, their forms dissolved into the core children, were mourned as if they had been lost to the void, their names etched into the ancestor stones of the Kulg Orn hold. Their sacrifice, a bitter testament to the dangers of the universe. The long journey home through the vast emptiness of space would be one of somber contemplation and lingering fear. The Hearthfire's maw, crippled but not broken, would limp back to the Kulg Orn hold, carrying its cargo of precious, terrifying knowledge, and its crew of scarred, traumatized kin. They were survivors, but their victory was not one of glory, but of profound, unsettling silence. The galaxy had shown them another of its infinite horrors, and they had, against all odds, contained it. But the price of that containment would echo in their minds, and in the annals of the Kulg Orn hold, for cycles to come. The return of the Hearthfire's maw to the Kulg Orn hold was not met with triumphal fanfare, but with a somber, almost clinical appraisal. The crippled, deep-core vessel, bearing the scars of its ordeal in the very heart of Xylos Prime, limped into the vast docking bay. Its once proud hull pockmarked and fused, its systems humming with the strained effort of a broken beast. The surviving kin disembarked, their faces etched with the deep lines of trauma, their eyes holding a distant, haunted look that spoke of unspeakable horrors. Guildmaster Kyle, walking at the head of his weary crew, met the unblinking gaze of the Votann emissaries, blank-faced automatons through which the ancestor cores delivered their pronouncements. There was no warmth, no commendation, only the cold, hard logic of the ancestors. The inquiry was immediate, exhaustive, and utterly unyielding. The Votann's judgment was delivered with chilling pragmatism. Kyle's deviation from the direct order for localized warp implosion was noted as a critical breach of protocol, a suboptimal application of resources in the face of existential threat. The immense loss of kin lives and material assets was recorded with meticulous precision. Guildmaster Kyle was stripped of his rank, permanently relieved of command, and assigned to a lifetime of administrative duties within the deepest archives of the hold, far from the perils of the void. His ancestor simulator was flagged, its data matrix bearing the indelible mark of compromised by anomalous warp exposure, a stain that would follow him forever. Yet, despite the severity of the official reprimand, there was a subtle, almost imperceptible nuance to the Votann's final decree. Chief Kinnick Zari, though censured for her undue scientific curiosity, was retained. Her work on the resonance nullifier and the detailed data from Xylos Prime, marked as information of profound strategic and technological value. The data slates recovered from the ancient city, along with the continuous feeds from the automated monitors now permanently installed around the inert core children, were integrated into the Votann's vast, ancient databanks. Xylos Prime and its impossible secret became a heavily classified anomaly, a forbidden zone, its data accessible only to the highest echelons of the Kynic Guild. The kin who had survived the Xylos Prime expedition were forever changed. Sergeant Cord, his mind irrevocably scarred by Xyla, was honorably discharged from active duty, spending his remaining cycles in the quiet solitude of the hold's deepest caverns, often seen murmuring to himself, grappling with the echoes of alien thought that still plagued his fractured mind. The other survivors were reassigned, their experiences recorded as cautionary tales, their names whispered with a mixture of reverence and dread. The hearth fire's ma itself was dismantled, its ravaged components salvaged for parts. Its name quietly retired from the Kulg-Orn Hold's active fleet. Its ordeal was a grim testament to the unfathomable dangers lurking in the universe, a stark reminder that even the indomitable will of the kin could be broken by forces beyond comprehension. The legacy of Xylos Prime was a scar upon the Kulg Orn hold. It became a byword for reckless ambition, for the terrible cost of pursuing knowledge when faced with unimaginable threats. The Votann's pragmatic order, though momentarily challenged by Kael's defiance, was reaffirmed in the harshest possible terms. The galaxy was too dangerous, its horrors too profound, to allow sentiment or even the insatiable drive for knowledge to overshadow the absolute necessity of survival. Yet, the knowledge itself, buried deep within the Votann's ancient minds, held a subtle, transformative power. The insights into chronon particle technology, into the nascent warp, into the terrifying evolutionary path of unsheltered humanity, all were meticulously catalogued, dissected, and integrated. The resonance. Nullifier, though a device of desperate containment, became a blueprint for potential future technologies, a grim promise of new ways to combat the warp, if ever such a dire need arose. Kael, in his self-imposed solitude within the archives, found a quiet peace in his new, ignoble role. He had lost his command, his honor, and a part of his sanity, but he had, perhaps, saved Xylos Prime from utter destruction and preserved a unique fragment of galactic history. He often pondered the irony. The Votann, in their infinite wisdom, had allowed him to pursue a path of immense cost, only to punish him for it, while simultaneously reaping the rewards of his actions. Such was the cold, calculating logic of the ancestor cores, mirroring the indifferent cruelty of the galaxy itself. The impossible city, deep within Xylos Prime's core, remained, a silent, glowing monument to human hubris and cosmic horror, held in eternal stasis by the humming resonance nullifier. It was a wound in reality, a secret known only to a few, a whisper of a forgotten age that now echoed only in the silent databanks of the Votann. The Kulg Orn hold had learned a harsh lesson, paid for in blood and sanity, that even in the vastness of the grim-dark galaxy, where hope was but a flickering candle, some knowledge was too terrible, too dangerous to ever truly be unleashed.